Of all the groups in Hollywood, those treated with the least respect are the critics, often frowned upon with derision and disdain. If they give something a great remark, people are suspicious, and if they give something a bad remark, they generally get excited for it and think it's going to be a great success. The gap between critic review and customer review has always been massive. Whether it be Captain Marvel or Picard Season 1 at 86 to 52, Season 2 at 85 to 27, or even with a movie like Ant-Man, they give it 48 and the audience loves it at 84%. This isn't even about my own opinion because I don't agree with that audience score. But it is astonishing at the critics' ability to be almost universally wrong about everything, to massive degrees. The worse the show gets, the more they love it. This isn't even just true for the critics of movies and television. If you go and look up product reviews, suddenly everything's amazing. Or in gaming, IGN coming out and trying to defend, why do so many games get a 7 and above? It just gets suspicious after a while, doesn't it? Now they try and claim that it's just because we only focus on the biggest and the best games. Of course, if we focus on AAA games, they're going to be amazing. That just makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, they're always good. There's never been a major game or major movie that's been a disaster. That can't happen. And while obviously not true, that's what this Something is Destroying Entertainment series wants to focus on. The why. Not just describing what's happening, but trying to work out the impetus behind it, the reason why people engage in that behavior in the first place. And I think nothing exemplifies the first reason better than art critics. Now, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of modern art critics, and so I did what everybody does in this scenario. I let somebody else do the work for me. 16 current British art critics worth listening to. Now, the first one has written for The Guardian and the BBC, so it looked like a good option. But then I scrolled down, and I thought, there's the winner. I don't know what he's sitting in front of, but I also don't want to, which is gonna be gold. Adrian Searle has also written for The Guardian, and his picture is just above somebody else who is standing next to a glorious piece of art of several multicolored horizontal lines. You may be getting a taste of where I'm going with this. From The Guardian, Confessions of an Art Critic, I've been known to go on all fours, and he certainly has. This is one of those clearly stunning pieces of art that can only be appreciated from the floor. Talking about beady eyes peering at him from over a counter, draping himself on a bench, deep in thought. Hours may pass until I emerge wild-haired, gawping. But you get the true ego, the true arrogance when he describes what it's like for him to be a critic. Somebody who confers the stars. There comes a point where at last I'm obliged to deliver what is often touted as the verdict. The weight of history heavy upon my shoulders, and reluctantly donning the critic's black cap, I finally take up my pen and deliver judgment. 5 stars means it's unmissable. Giddy under the influence of it all, I am ravished and moved to tears where method and criteria fly out of the window. Ego, arrogance, and
sheer f***ing hubris.
Self-important and pretentious to the extreme. Somebody who's convinced themselves that they're doing not only an important job, but an important job that nobody else can. You can't go and look at a painting and do what I can. I've got that critic's cap. I can see something you can't. Only I can judge it, because you just don't have the palate for it. And this leads to various problems within the industry. Ever looked at the Oscars and thought, I have no idea how that won, and then looked at the description of the movie? Oh, that's why it won. Welcome to Oscar bait. Oscar bait, also known as a practice of Oscarbation, is where movies often want an Oscar because it enhances the studio's reputation and boosts future ticket sales. Doesn't anymore, love. Studios and producers have tried to engineer certain films to attract Oscar nominations. Typically, the results are more serious, depressing, or artistic films. True art is angsty, full of cynicism, suffering, injustice, tragedy, and hopelessness. Everything, which entertainment isn't. You've been hard at graft all week, and you just want to escape into a different reality, and what you get? Cynicism, suffering, injustice, and hopelessness. Oh, I can't understand why the audiences don't love this. Only the grimmest of tales can effectively explore the horrid realities of life itself, the fragility of the human existence, the crushing agony of love and regret. In these types of stories, nobody is really the good guy, not even the hero. Does it remind you of anything? Why do we have superhero movies where there aren't really heroes anymore? After all, don't you know that any other story with an unambiguously happy ending is just a piece of cheap, boring commercial tripe? These people look down on what other people would call entertainment. And it's not just because they think they can see something nobody else can. We've just got a better vision, a better taste. No. They like it specifically because you don't. Because the common pleb in the streets, the audience at large, hates the movie, it makes them like it even more. It's the same with art. Oh, anyone can go into the Sistine Chapel and look at it and be amazed by the talent involved. But something awful, that requires a refined palette. Something where the people don't look like people, or where you have to act like a complete lunatic crawling around on the floor with something hovering over your face. It's not that the art is bad, it's just your palette isn't refined enough to appreciate it. It goes over your head. But me, because I know all about it, I am the professional critic after all, I can see the true, complete picture and understand its true glory, which is why I like it and you don't. Standing out from the crowd, being special, liking something which is horrible, specifically because you can pretend it's not, is half of the point. After all, anything that the great unwashed masses enjoy, well, that's just cheap, boring commercial tripe. We can see this in the 15 most obvious Oscar bait movies. Number 1, a period drama about discrimination in the 1960s. That sounds like a laugh a minute. Think I'm going to put that on straight after this video. Or Coda, where the plot revolves around being the only non-deaf member of her family. In a movie. It's universally accepted that audio is far more important than the visuals, up to maybe like 70 or 80%. But no, we're gonna be special and make a movie where the audio is almost entirely pointless because none of the characters can hear it. This was a divisive movie because many claimed it misrepresented their competence, and its win was a shock to many. Don't you understand though, this was never a movie which was meant to accurately display anything. Of course it misrepresented your competence. That was the entire point. Because the bigger victims, the biggest disaster, the more horror, tragedy, and grim reality that they can put into this movie, the better it is. The less entertaining they made the entertainment, the better it would be for an Oscar. Only that can show the true cynicism, suffering, and injustice in the world. As for comedy shows, that's just all bourgeoisie garbage. Us refined critics don't have time to waste on laughing. I've got to go out there and solve the world's problems. And it's not just ego because it makes them feel nice, it makes them feel more important about themselves. I actually think that this ego is the main driving force behind the difference in scores for the audience and the critics themselves. They didn't like Marvel because it was a good movie. They liked it because of Brie. They liked it for what they stood for, the empowerment of it all. That's what attracted them to it. Everything that turned audiences off is what increased the score for the critics in the first place. It was the same with Picard. And don't tell me that destroying the Borg and making them go around to simulate for peace and love wasn't helping increase that score along with other narratives, like traveling back in time, appearing in America, and then suddenly being treated like you just don't belong, you don't have any papers. I can't imagine where they were going with that storyline. Even in season 3, where the audience starts to like it, suddenly the critics are like, this is perfect. I can't even think of one single problem with this entire season, which is weird because I can. What's that? A female-fronted comedy about an empowered lawyer, high-powered, that goes around and absolutely craps on the fans? Well, the fans didn't like it, but the critics sure did, because anything that puts the audience down is just something that makes them add a few extra points as they put on that heavy, odious cap of judgment. And the thing with critics is you don't even have to be a professional critic, because the Oscars, which is what the bait was entirely designed for, is the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, comprised of actors, writers, directors, producers, art directors, cinematographers, film editors, sound technicians. Everybody is involved, and they all get together, the entire industry, to sniff each other's farts, and all unify behind this idea that we're not just making entertainment for the plebs. That might be something we do to make money, but really we've got a true aim. We make art. And the moment you think you're making art, you've lost entire grounding in reality. Your ego is in the stratosphere, and you will inevitably produce trash. No, you're not making art because you're pointing at a lens at somebody lying in a room. The fact that you've tilted a camera doesn't inspire the world to have a different emotion as they're looking at the scene. It's not big or impressive, it's just television. And your only job is to entertain. But this entire egotistical critic attitude makes them forget that. Completely forget the audiences which things are even made for, such as new voices are shaking up Scandinavian cinema. We've just grabbed some Oscar nominations from an Iranian-born Danish Halma and a Swedish director whose father's Egyptian, a part of an exciting new generation of Nordic Halmas who are shaking up traditional Scandinavian cinema. So if you like traditional Scandinavian cinema, well, it's not that anymore, because that is being destroyed and changed because new people are coming in and doing their own thing, and that's good apparently. Doesn't matter about all the fans that made it a current success under what it is. No, we forget about those. It's time for something new. These filmmakers are delivering singularly and timely movies shot abroad or in different languages, weaving together genres and other elements, breaking away from the long entrenched trend of so-called Nordic noir, literary adaptations and historical movies. These films are not easily financed, and sometimes have limited commercial potential. We've taken traditional Scandinavian cinema and we've changed it, brought new people in, and that's obviously better because we said it was. And they're changing everything, changing the genres, altering the entire movie landscape. And nobody wants it. Not only is it hard to get money for it, but nobody wants to see them in the first place. And yet, that's a good thing, because these things may have limited commercial potential, but they're often rewarded by top critics, festival laurels, and international sales. These were shortlisted at this year's Oscars. They were done as the Danish and Swedish official entries, even though they're set in other countries. A country built up its movie industry by making movies for the fans, people in its own country that actually liked what was being created. It made a tradition out of it all. But then, oh no, don't you know, we're artists. We know what you really want, even if you're not going to pay for it. And so they brought in other people, colonized that successful industry, used its resources to change it, alter it, make something the fans no longer wanted. Also, they could come in and replace the original movies that people wanted for the critics, because it pleased the critics, even when the fans didn't like it, because it has limited commercial potential. This is an entire article about how films are being replaced with things nobody wants, purely to please the critics, get those awards, and they're saying it's a good thing, because they're not making them for you. They're making them for all those people over there that can truly appreciate the big picture, appreciate the art. Movies about suffering and injustice, hopes and dreams never coming to fruition, and the utter futility of happiness. Really just seem like these are made by people that have never had to suffer in their entire life, doesn't it? Because if you've been through something horrific, you tend to want to put it behind you, to move on, to experience new things. But if you've lived a life of privilege where you've never had to worry about anything at all, then instead, suffering and pain, it can get put on a pedestal as imagine what I would be like if I was a suffering, starving artist. Maybe then I could make a Scandinavian movie which is shot in Farsi and English about a man hoping to get a visa. Oh, I'm gonna have to start making a list. These are movies I just can't have out of my life. I'm gonna get the 4K Blu-ray box set after this. But while ego, privilege, and the need to feel superior, I think underpin all of the other reasons, and is probably one of the main ones, it's far from the only one. Because there's something else that you get by giving good reviews. There's something else that you get when you just don't rock the boat. You don't annoy those big, powerful corporations and instead desire, please, sir, can you just feed me some more? And that is access. Access comes when everything you say is great. I absolutely love what you're getting. Oh, please, Lord of the Rings looks absolutely incredible. Can you just give me an article in advance? Could you give us some exclusive pictures or interviews? We could even make an entire issue about this. Giving good reviews in exchange for access, even if that isn't written down or stated in any way, it is still an exchange of value. You give me the exclusivity, and I use that as a trending topic, as information that nobody else has, and that is how I turn it into money. Money doesn't have to directly exchange hands when you have access, because access is money in itself. And if I came to a company with a review and they handed me a wad of cash, that would be deemed bribery. Is access the same? Because it's tough. On the one hand, I'd say no, it isn't. It probably depends on the person. There's plenty of tech review channels out there that will be sent phones and laptops in advance and give perfectly honest, authentic reviews. You do that, that's great. But the issue is, those are individuals, and their authenticity is actually incredibly important to them. That's why people watch them. Do you think it's the same with a company? Or do you think a company would do whatever it is to get those next clicks? Because everybody ties this to the company name itself. It's never the author. No one really cares about the author's name. Is that why IGN is just giving out so many 7s? Because they say it's just because they focus on the biggest and the best known games. But they too get access, early copies to reviews, and people advertise on their website. Are people going to be clicking that advert and buying that game if the review says it's awful? Even if none of these things are deliberate, it takes an incredibly strong and moral spine to not have in the back of your head, I am losing a load of money if I say this is bad, and not have that in some way affect your score, even if it's just adding a couple of points. Maybe that 5 becomes a 7. Maybe 7 becomes the new mid, because 5 is average, 6 is better than average, and yet here we are, giving most things a 7. Are most things significantly better than average? Because that doesn't seem like a statistical possibility. Or maybe they do just only write about those big games that are just so incredible. But the issue is, if all your experience was incredibly high quality things, then your mid, your 5, would simply have its standard raised. not the score increased. So I'm not even sure that works itself. One of the reasons I now go out and watch so many K-drama things, or go back into the 90s and watch shows there, is so I can reset my quality bar. Because if I just consumed modern Western entertainment, then my bar for mid would be so much lower than it currently is. Let's not pretend that critics actually have consistent viewpoints at all. The Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power review, so astounding. It makes House of the Dragon look amateur. And then soon after, now it's over, let's come out and say it. The Rings of Power was a stinker. Now, yes, these are from different people, but I'm not going to let you off that easily. No, you don't get to brag about how amazing the show is under one author and then just change it so you can say the truth after it's all over. You don't get to talk out of both sides of your mouth. The coverage of a topic should be consistent. It should be done by the same person. And if it isn't, so that your opinion of something goes all over the place every single episode, then that's your problem. Also, it makes even less sense when I do think that the Rings of Power got better over time, not worse. Simply because more things happened in the last few episodes, rather than the first two, where we talked about a rot sinking because it went downwards and a boat looked up. At least the last few episodes had some kind of event happening, whether you liked it or not. And of course, we found out there's so much in it for critics. They get ego boosts, they get to feel superior, and they get access, which is money. But what's in it for the studios? Because sure, Oscar bait is all well and good, something more long-term and repeatable for television shows and stuff, which are never going to get Oscars in the first place. But for those, we get free press in itself. The dropping of the embargo, where a company sends out the stuff in advance and gets the reviews all built up so they drop simultaneously at the same time, is a massive news event, and everybody reports on it. It means that it's not just people who would look for the review that find it, but everyone else finds out the general impression of what the general consensus of those reviewers are. From bold to epic and staggeringly bad, it divides critics. The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power has most critics picking up their jaws off the floor. People are loving Rings of Power. Even though the reviews came out and people were looking at all of them, they still came up with different titles. It's absolutely amazing, everyone's blown away. Oh, it's bold, epic, but also staggeringly bad. Because when you release them all in one wave, the story isn't about one judgment, and people can make the story they want to, and the press want to stay on your good side. This meant that unless you wanted to go out and read 50 reviews, what you came away with is people were picking their jaws up off the floor. Not that actually there was a range of opinion. This is how you end up with people saying things like, the Rings of Power is a bona fide hit. Why doesn't it feel like it? Why does he keep reading all of these news stories, seeing all these opinions about how everybody's loving it, the reviews are loving it, this is amazing? And yet somehow, deep down, reality just keeps hitting him in the face. It's like my brain knows a hit, it's been told from all these sources it was a massive hit, and yet I just can't get rid of that deep-rooted feeling that it isn't. When there's a load of benefits for critics, it allows the companies to manipulate the results and release the reviews in a way which is most beneficial for those. Specifically, so they can get titles like this, where the story isn't even about the show itself, but everyone else's opinions of the show. And you know, you wouldn't want to watch it and say it was crap, would you? You wouldn't want to see the first 2 episodes and think they were boring and awful, because these professional critics have already said it's amazing. Everybody thinks it's amazing. You're on your own and you're disagreeing with the majority. And you wouldn't want to do that, would you? There's a reason peer pressure's a thing. Standing out for the crowd isn't common. It's not something that most people want to do. And they can drum up that sensation, provide you with the opinion that you're supposed to have before the show even releases by the power of critics. This all leads to a self-fulfilling circle, where the critics want to like your stuff, but they also want you to make something that's just for them and kind of annoys those audiences over there because we don't like those unwashed masses. And the studios want to please the critics. They want to provide the critics this horrible, unentertaining vision. And so you end up going further and further away from what the audience wants, from good quality entertainment. And that's even without more direct forms of intervention, such as why are game developer bonuses based on critic review scores? I'm going to get paid more if the critic likes it, not necessarily if it makes more sales. So the audience could hate it, but if the critics hit that certain score, I'm quids in. Of course I'm going to put in what they want, no matter how horrible or antithetical to what most people want it is. It could disgust the audience, but if it pleased the critics, it's going in the game. And I don't know if movie and television stuff has anything like this where it's linked to critic scores, but even if there isn't any direct link, I guarantee that all of those critic reviews are collated and handed to the higher-ups as proof. Look, everybody loves it, so they're definitely going to look at those critics reviews. Not so much the ones on YouTube from normal people. If you need to please your boss that you've made something amazing, you're definitely going to be showing him those critics reviews as proof, which means you're going to design for them in the first place. Especially when those critic reviews aren't just for the positive appeal, but it allows you to overrule the fans. If the critics love it and the fans hate it, well, isn't that just evidence that the fans are wrong in some way. The critics loved Captain Marvel and the audience hated it. But isn't that just proof? Are the critics, these enlightened artists, they know the true quality behind something. They're not actually discriminating against anything. They're not the bigots. But those audiences, we know what they're like. They just can't stand an empowered woman. Empowerment? They don't think they can be lawyers or comedians. Mind you, our critics, they're above such petty complaints as that. The very fact that the critics exist in that self-fulfilling loop allows them to absolutely crap on the fans themselves. It makes it so it doesn't matter if the fans are authentic. If they come out with their own reviews and say the truth, if people come out and point out every exact problem with it, then it doesn't matter, because the companies don't hear about it. They hear from the critics, and it makes them comfortable to come out and attack the very people they need to give them money. And this is why it's just so common and all over the place. And it can only be done if there was a counter-narrative, if there was a counterpoint, if everybody agreed, if everybody was honest, then this kind of line would never be allowed to flourish. Because they wouldn't be able to claim the fans were doing it unless there was this other, more respected, superior group out there giving it the high scores. Without the critics, this dies on its ass. So does review bombing, by the way. The only reason the review bomb narrative can even hold water is because the critics are sitting right there, right alongside it, going, this is amazing, and it makes the audience look like the unreasonable ones, rather than the other way around. The audience score is the only ones that matter, because they're your customers. They're the ones giving you money. They're the only opinion that matters. And yet instead, we've changed. Everything's been flipped on its head. We care more about the Oscars, more about the embargo reveals, more about the headlines we can get as all the critics come out and deliver their unifying verdict, which allows us to defeat everybody else. No wonder then that they pander to the critics, pander to people that care about true art, the ones who like it specifically because you don't. The fragility of the human existence and the utter futility of happiness. And comedy, we wouldn't want to make anyone laugh, would we? That's just bourgeoisie garbage. I don't consider myself a critic. Even if I review something, I'm just giving you my opinion. I'm kind of pointing at trash and laughing at it. That's the way I see it. I'm just glad anyone's willing to watch. If you disagree with me and put it in the comments, fair enough. There's nothing that separates me from you. Our opinions are just as valid about it. But that's not how the critics see it, nor is it how the companies do. And because these companies have been filled with people who don't value profit anymore, it means that the customer has lost all value to them because they no longer care if you're paying for the movie. They care if they're impressing the people that they need to prove their point. If internally they can spin a narrative that actually all the fans are just horrible discriminatory bigots and we shouldn't be listening to them in the first place. If they care about the opinions of the people they respect more than the money that's going into their coffers, then you end up with a self-fulfilling recurring loop between the critics and the creators that will only ever lead to increasingly terrible entertainment until somebody goes bankrupt. Because the critics couldn't do this on their own. They couldn't do it without the people in the companies also falling for the same tricks. They couldn't do it without that self-recurring loop and the people not caring about the customers. I've already covered actors in this series, I've covered critics, but there is so many other aspects of this industry which are all contributing to its destruction. And it's astonishing just how many of them could be solved with one simple method. You listen to the customers and you give them what they want. Because it doesn't matter if you agree with the customer, they're the ones giving you the money. And that means that whether you like it or not, the customer's always right. Well, those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe. More videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.